Science has provided the possibility of liberation for human beings from hard labor. But science itself is not a liberator.
Albert Einstein, the genius who changed how we see time and space, did something no one expected. He burned his last notebook before he passed away. What was inside those pages that he didn't want anyone to see? Was he protecting the world from something dangerous? Join us as we explore the real reason behind his mysterious act, the man who redefined the universe. Before Einstein, the world of science was guided by the work of Isaac Newton, whose ideas had stood firm for over 2 centuries. Newton's universe was steady, predictable, and ruled by simple forces of motion and gravity, but Einstein looked beyond what everyone else could see. In the early years of the 20th century, he introduced new ideas that changed everything. His theory of relativity revealed that space and time were not separate. They were linked together in a fabric that could bend and stretch. This discovery transformed physics and made Einstein a worldwide sensation. The year 1905 became known as his miracle year. During that time, Einstein published several groundbreaking papers that reshaped science. One of them introduced the special theory of relativity, a concept that showed how time and space behave differently depending on speed and motion. From this came the famous equation, energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. It showed that even a small amount of matter could hold an enormous amount of energy, an idea that would later change technology and warfare forever. A decade later, in 1915, Einstein presented his general theory of relativity. This theory went even deeper. It explained that gravity was not a pulling force, but rather the result of space itself being curved by massive objects. The sun, for example, bends space around it, and that curved space guides the planets as they move. This idea was so revolutionary that it took years before it was fully accepted. But when observations finally confirmed his predictions, Einstein became one of the most famous people on Earth. In 1921, he received the Nobel Prize, not for relativity, but for explaining the photoelectric effect, how light can knock electrons out of metal surfaces. This work laid the foundation for quantum physics, a new branch of science that would later power technologies like solar panels and electronics. It proved that Einstein's mind was not limited to one field. He could look at light, motion, or gravity and find a completely new way to understand them. Beyond his scientific work, Einstein became a global voice for peace and equality. He spoke against racism, war, and injustice. His words carried weight, not only because he was brilliant, but because he deeply cared about humanity. People listened to him as both a scientist and a moral thinker. He believed that knowledge should serve goodness, not destruction. As the years went by, Einstein's fame only grew. Children, artists, and philosophers all admired him. His face became a symbol of wisdom, appearing in books, posters, and even cartoons. Yet behind that friendly image, there was a private side to him that few ever saw. Despite all his success, Einstein remained humble and deeply thoughtful. He kept many of his deepest ideas and fears hidden in personal notebooks that never reached the public. Near the end of his life, he became quieter, spending long hours alone in his study at Princeton. There, surrounded by papers and books, he continued to write down complex thoughts that only he could understand. Among these were notes he would later destroy with his own hands. The world saw him as a man who revealed the mysteries of creation. But there was one mystery he kept to himself, a final notebook he burned before his death. And that act would leave the world wondering forever. What could have been inside those final pages? And why did the man who explained the universe choose to erase a part of his own? Inside Einstein's greatest works, Albert Einstein's ideas did not appear from nowhere. They came from deep observation, imagination, and endless questioning. He had a gift for seeing ordinary things in extraordinary ways. While others saw time as a simple measure or light as a straight beam, Einstein saw puzzles hidden in plain sight. His greatest works were built on the courage to doubt what everyone else believed and to find truth in the smallest details of nature. His special theory of relativity, introduced in 1905, changed the entire understanding of motion. He showed that space and time are not fixed. They depend on the speed of the observer. When something moves very fast, close to the speed of light, time slows down and distances shrink. This was not just imagination. It was backed by mathematics that would later be proven by experiments. The famous equation, energy equals mass times the speed of light squared, came from this theory. It revealed that matter and energy are two sides of the same coin. Every piece of matter contains hidden energy waiting to be released. 10 years later, Einstein expanded his ideas into the general theory of relativity. This theory explained gravity in a completely new way. Instead of describing it as a pull between two objects, Einstein showed that massive objects bend the space and time around them. The Earth moves around the Sun not because it is being pulled, but because the Sun's mass curves the space around it, and Earth simply follows that curve. This vision turned the universe into a living, flexible fabric. It explained how stars move, how planets orbit, and even how light bends when passing near large objects. General relativity also predicted things no one had ever imagined before: black holes, gravitational waves, and the expansion of the universe itself. Decades after Einstein's death, scientists confirmed these predictions, proving just how far ahead his mind truly was. But Einstein's genius did not stop there. In the same miracle year of 1905, he explained the photoelectric effect, showing that light behaves not just as waves, but also as tiny particles called photons. This discovery formed the beginning of quantum theory, which became the backbone of modern physics and technology. Without it, things like lasers, solar cells, and even computers would not exist today. Another of his great contributions was his explanation of Brownian motion, the random movement of tiny particles in liquid. Through this, he provided proof that atoms actually exist, something many scientists at the time still doubted. In his later years, Einstein devoted himself to what he called the unified field theory. He believed that nature must be simple and that all the forces of the universe, gravity, electromagnetism, and beyond must be connected through one grand idea. This search became his lifelong obsession. Day after day, he filled notebooks with calculations and sketches, trying to find the missing link. He never finished it, but he believed that someday someone would. Einstein's way of working was as unique as his ideas. He relied less on experiments and more on imagination. He performed thought experiments in his mind, picturing himself riding alongside a beam of light or watching time flow differently from another point in space. He trusted his intuition as much as his mathematics. In his notebooks, he used his own symbols and marks, often mixing personal reflections with scientific notes. As he grew older, his writings became harder for others to understand. But how did it all start? Let's find out. Where it all started. Albert Einstein's story began in the small city of Ulm, in the Kingdom of Württemberg, Germany, in the year 1879. He was born into a secular Jewish family that valued education, hard work, and curiosity more than wealth or fame. His father, Hermann Einstein, ran a modest electrical business, while his mother, Pauline, was a cultured woman who loved music and played the piano beautifully. Their home was filled with quiet encouragement, the sound of notes, and the hum of new ideas. From an early age, it was clear that little Albert was unlike other children. He was slow to speak, often staring at objects with intense focus, as if trying to see something others could not. His parents worried at first, but as he grew older, his silence gave way to deep curiosity. One of his earliest memories was receiving a simple compass from his father. Watching the needle point north, no matter how he turned it, fascinated him endlessly. That tiny instrument revealed to him that invisible forces existed, unseen powers that guided motion and energy. This small wonder would shape his lifelong obsession with uncovering the hidden laws of nature. Einstein's childhood was filled with questions. He wanted to know why light moved the way it did, why space seemed endless, and how time could be measured. While other children were satisfied with answers from teachers or parents, Albert wanted proof. He often challenged his teachers, asking questions that had no easy answers. This habit made him seem rebellious, though his mind was simply too restless for routine lessons. He disliked strict memorization and preferred thinking deeply about problems. Despite his teachers labeling him slow or inattentive, he excelled in mathematics and physics subjects that allowed his imagination to expand freely. When his family moved to Munich, he attended a strict Catholic school where discipline ruled every moment. The rigid system clashed with his free-thinking nature, making him feel isolated. Yet during these lonely years, he began to develop his private world, one filled with ideas, sketches, and silent reflections. He would spend hours daydreaming, imagining invisible rays of light and how they might travel through space. These thoughts became the foundation of his later theories. In his teenage years, Einstein faced many challenges. His father's business struggled and the family moved to Italy, leaving Albert behind to finish school. However, he felt unhappy and trapped. He eventually left school without a formal diploma and joined his family in Milan. His parents worried about his future, but he remained confident in his path. He later enrolled in the Swiss Federal Polytechnic in Zurich after passing the entrance exams on his second attempt. This moment marked a turning point. He had finally found a place where his creativity could thrive. At the Polytechnic, Einstein studied mathematics and physics with renewed energy. He met students who shared his passion, including Mileva Maric, a brilliant young woman from Serbia who would later become his first wife. Their bond grew from a shared love for science, and she became his closest intellectual partner. Einstein's professors admired his sharp mind, though some considered him too independent. He often skipped lectures to study on his own, exploring ideas that were far ahead of his time. During his studies, he was influenced by remarkable thinkers, such as Hermann Minkowski, who later expanded on Einstein's work by introducing the idea of space-time, and Max Planck, whose studies in quantum theory would later connect with Einstein's own discoveries. These mentors helped refine his understanding of how nature's forces could be unified through mathematics. Einstein's personality blossomed during his academic years. He was independent, reflective, and deeply driven by curiosity rather than ambition. He enjoyed solitude and often preferred walking or playing the violin to crowded social events. This quiet nature, combined with his habit of carrying notebooks, allowed him to record his private ideas whenever inspiration struck. Each page became a map of his mind, filled with formulas, questions, and diagrams that revealed how he saw the world. By the time he graduated from the Polytechnic, the quiet boy from Ulm had grown into a man ready to challenge the universe with nothing more than his pen, his mind, and the notebooks that held his dreams. But who would imagine that his public life was very much different from his private life? The private life of Einstein. Behind Einstein's brilliant mind was a man who lived simply, thought deeply, and loved in complicated ways. His personal life, though less public than his science, revealed just how closely his emotions and intellect were tied. His relationships, routines, and private thoughts shaped not only who he was, but also how he worked. And nowhere was this connection clearer than in his lifelong devotion to his notebooks. Einstein's marriage to Mileva Maric began with promise. They shared a bond built on intellect, long discussions, and a shared fascination for physics. Yet their love soon met challenges. Einstein's growing fame, combined with his endless focus on work, created distance between them. Mileva, who had once been his equal in ideas, found herself overshadowed by his rising name. Their marriage grew strained, and by the time they separated, the warmth they once shared had faded into formality. They later divorced, and Einstein married his cousin, Elsa Einstein, who offered him comfort and stability during his later years. Despite the emotional distance, Einstein carried guilt and tenderness in his heart. His letters revealed a man torn between affection and responsibility. He wanted peace in his family, yet his restless curiosity always pulled him back to his work. He was not the kind of man to settle easily. Science was his true companion, the one constant presence that never betrayed or demanded too much. Einstein had 3 children. His eldest, Liesel, was a mystery. Some records suggest she may have passed away young or been adopted away, a painful secret that he rarely discussed. His son, Hans Albert, followed in his footsteps and became a respected engineer, while his younger son, Eduard, known as Tata, suffered from schizophrenia. Einstein's bond with Eduard was loving but heartbreaking. Watching his son struggle with mental illness brought him deep sadness and guilt, feelings he rarely expressed publicly. Amid all this, Einstein maintained a simple and steady lifestyle. He wore similar clothes each day, preferred modest meals, and avoided luxury. He loved walking outdoors and often played the violin when he needed to think. These quiet routines balanced the storms in his mind. But the one habit that defined him most was his constant writing. No matter where he went, a cafe, a train, or a lecture hall, a small notebook was always by his side. Inside these notebooks, Einstein captured every spark of thought. Some pages were filled with equations, others with half-finished ideas or reflections about life, morality, and the mysteries of existence. He questioned not only how the universe worked, but why it existed at all. His notebooks were part science, part philosophy, and part confession. Einstein was fiercely private about his writings. He shared his published papers with the world but kept his personal notes hidden. They were his sanctuary, a space where he could explore wild ideas without fear of judgment. Even his closest friends rarely saw what he wrote in them. These pages held his hopes, his regrets, and his unanswered questions. They were the only place where he could be entirely himself. Over the years, the notebooks grew in number, filling shelves and drawers in his study. Some were tidy and mathematical, while others were messy, filled with symbols only he could understand. But each one carried the same feeling, the desire to understand everything. As he aged, his notebooks became quieter too, less about the external world and more about his inner reflections. To Einstein, writing was more than a habit. It was survival. When words or emotions overwhelmed him, he turned to his notebook. It became a private dialogue with the universe, a conversation that no one else could hear. This bond between Einstein and his notebooks explains why, near the end of his life, they became so sacred to him. They were more than just records of thought, they were his soul in written form. Each line carried memories, dreams, and fears. Each page represented the world as only he could see it. It was this deep personal connection that made his final decision to burn his last notebook so haunting. It was not just paper he destroyed, but the final window into his most private world. The later years, fame, frustration, and fear. By the time Albert Einstein entered the later years of his life, he was no longer just a scientist. He was a global symbol of intelligence, peace, and the potential of the human mind. Yet behind his calm smile and playful wit, a quiet storm was growing. He had changed the world with his ideas, but the world was changing in ways that filled him with both pride and dread. The very theories that had once made him famous were now being twisted into tools of destruction. Einstein had become world famous after the theory of relativity reshaped how people understood space, time, and energy. By the 1930s, he had settled in Princeton, where he continued to study and write. However, the rise of fascism in Europe disturbed him deeply. He had already fled Nazi Germany, leaving behind his homeland and much of his extended family. The world around him was entering a dark time, and he feared how science might be used in such hands. In 1939, two other scientists approached Einstein with an urgent concern. They believed that German researchers were developing a new kind of weapon based on nuclear reactions, a weapon that could destroy entire cities. Though Einstein did not work directly on weapons, he understood how his famous equation, E equals mc squared, could be used to release massive amounts of energy. After much thought, he signed a letter to President Franklin Roosevelt, urging the United States to investigate nuclear research before the Nazis did. That letter became one of the most influential documents in modern history. It eventually led to the Manhattan Project, the secret American program that built the first atomic bombs. Einstein himself never took part in the project and was not even allowed access to its classified work. Still, when the bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, he felt the weight of guilt. His equation had made the idea possible, and now it had been used to end countless lives. As he grew older, Einstein began to speak more about peace than physics. He admitted that signing that letter was the greatest mistake of his life. It haunted him, not because he had acted in bad faith, but because he had seen how easily knowledge could be turned into harm. The atom had been split, and humanity had crossed a line it could never uncross. He became an active voice for disarmament, writing essays and giving speeches that urged nations to end nuclear testing and focus on cooperation. He supported global unity and even spoke of forming a single world government to control dangerous technologies. He feared that humans were advancing in science faster than in kindness, His letters and writings from the late 1940s show a man struggling to balance pride in human progress with a growing fear of moral failure. At Princeton, Einstein lived a quiet life. He wore the same clothes most days, walked to his office with his violin case, and continued to work even when his body began to weaken. His health was failing, but his curiosity never stopped. Every morning he would sit with his notebooks, recording thoughts that ranged from equations to reflections about humanity. In his final years, Einstein became even more secretive about his work. He was searching for a unified field theory, a single explanation that could connect all physical forces in the universe. But his motivation was no longer purely scientific. He was driven by a moral question. Could complete understanding of the universe ever be trusted in human hands? He had seen what happened when one discovery was misused. He worried that his final work might unlock powers even greater than the atomic bomb. By the early 1950s, he had stopped sharing some of his most complex notes. He became more guarded and private. His closest colleagues noticed that he no longer explained everything he was working on. There were whispers that his final notebook contained formulas no one else had seen. When visitors asked, he would simply smile and change the subject. Einstein's later writings were not only scientific, they were philosophical and deeply personal. He wrote about the relationship between science and ethics, warning that technological progress without moral growth could destroy humanity. He feared that the world's obsession with weapons and power would only lead to greater suffering. As his health declined, he continued to write in his small notebooks every day. He did not seek fame or approval. He only wanted understanding. His final works were written with a kind of urgency, as if he was racing against time. And as his final years approached, those fears began to take shape in a single decision that would leave historians and scientists puzzled for decades. What was hidden inside those final pages? Why did he decide that some knowledge should vanish with him? The answers may lie in the shadows of his last writings, in the notes he kept secret, and the truths he never dared to share. The hidden notes and what they might have contained. As Albert Einstein neared the end of his life, his notebooks became more than a record of science. They became a vault for his deepest secrets. By this time, his body was weak, but his mind was still alive with questions about the universe. He spent long hours alone in his Princeton study, surrounded by stacks of papers filled with symbols and numbers only he could understand. But among them was one notebook that stood apart, the one that no one would ever see. This notebook, written during his final years, was believed to hold the unfinished pieces of his unified field theory. Einstein had spent decades trying to unite all the forces of nature, gravity, electromagnetism, and the mysterious forces inside atoms into a single, elegant equation. He believed that somewhere, deep in the structure of mathematics, the universe had one underlying order. However, the theory refused to fit perfectly. Each time he came close, another problem appeared. Inside the notebook, there were fragments, bits of equations, strange symbols, and sketches of geometric patterns that hinted at ideas no one else could fully decode. Historians who later studied his drafts noticed that his final attempts became more abstract. He was reaching for something beyond physics, something that combined science, logic, and philosophy. But this was not just a book of numbers. It also contained reflections about human nature. In between the equations, Einstein often wrote notes to himself, short reminders about morality, peace, and the dangers of unchecked power. He had begun to doubt that humanity was ready to handle the full truth of the universe. In one of his last letters to a close friend, he wrote that he felt knowledge had moved faster than wisdom. He saw machines replacing men, weapons replacing dialogue, and ambition replacing humility. These feelings were believed to have influenced his decision to keep certain discoveries hidden. Some researchers have suggested that Einstein's final notebook might have contained early ideas related to quantum energy or even theoretical methods for manipulating mass and gravity. If that was true, he may have realized that such knowledge could be used for new kinds of weapons. Having seen the outcome of atomic research, he could not bear to imagine another catastrophe caused by his ideas. There are also historical clues suggesting that some pages of his notes were deliberately destroyed before his death. He might have feared that someone would take them and continue his work without understanding his moral caution. To Einstein, science was never meant to be separated from ethics. If humanity could not use knowledge responsibly, he believed that some truths should remain hidden. The mystery deepened after his death in 1955. Among his belongings, several notebooks were found, but one was missing the last one he had written in. Some of his assistants recalled that he had asked for his personal papers to be kept private. Others claimed that he had quietly burned certain notes himself, not long before he passed away. What those pages contained has remained one of the greatest mysteries in modern science. Perhaps they held the missing link to his grand theory, or perhaps they contained something more dangerous, a discovery he feared the world was not ready to handle. And in that final balance, a decision began to form, one that would surprise the world and define his legacy forever. What could be so powerful that even Einstein chose to destroy it? What secret did he believe the world should never see? The answers would be revealed in his final act, the moment when the man who illuminated the universe chose to burn the last trace of his own light. Why Einstein burned his final notebook. In the spring of 1955, the world's greatest mind made one final choice, a quiet act that would remain one of history's deepest mysteries. Albert Einstein, frail and nearing the end of his life, sat alone in his study at Princeton. For days, smoke rose gently from his small chimney, noticed only by those who passed by his house. His assistant, Helen Dukas, later confirmed what few could believe. Einstein was burning his personal notes, including the last notebook he had ever written in. This act was not done in haste or despair. It was deliberate, calm, and almost ritual-like. Einstein, the man who had reshaped humanity's understanding of the cosmos, had decided that some knowledge was too dangerous to survive him. He knew that even unfinished ideas could inspire others to chase discoveries they did not fully understand, and he feared what might happen if his final theories were used without care. Throughout his life, Einstein had guarded his privacy, but his later years were different. He had seen the world grow sharper, colder, and more divided. Nations were building nuclear arsenals, preparing for wars that could destroy everything he had once dreamed of protecting. To him, knowledge was sacred, not a tool for power. As he watched the world twist science into a weapon, he decided that his last contribution would not be another discovery but a warning written in fire. Eyewitnesses recalled that Einstein spent hours in his study before the smoke began. Helen Dukas noticed the faint smell of burning paper and knew better than to interrupt him. When she later entered, she saw the fireplace still warm and ashes resting in the grate. Einstein told her softly that he had simply been tidying up. But in truth, he was letting go of something far greater. His final notebook, the physical symbol of a lifetime struggle between genius and conscience. The decision was deeply personal. He had spent years trying to complete his unified field theory, the dream that had consumed his later life. Those final notes may have contained complex equations, pieces of a puzzle that modern scientists are still trying to solve. Yet Einstein feared that such knowledge, in the wrong hands, could lead to technologies far beyond atomic power. He did not want his final thoughts to become blueprints for destruction. To him, the fire was not an end but a cleansing. It was his way of protecting the purity of discovery. The flames, soft and steady, symbolized release, a letting go of his burden, and a return of knowledge to the universe from which it came. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.